Good Monday morning. Today we are going to look at how you can do dependency injection without classes, using only functions. I am your host, MPJ, and you are watching Fun Function.
That is your computer, your friend. It is your friend.
Alright, so the viewer that I am envisioning for this episode is somebody that is coming from a Java or C# background, and you are used to doing things in certain ways, and you are wondering if those ways are applicable to JavaScript, and if not, how to do them in a more JavaScripty way. Yeah, that's it. And it might also be that you're just fallen onto this video and you are wondering what dependency injection even is. And if that's the case, you can check out this video that I made on the subject of dependency injection. You can also find that episode in the episode, that link to that episode in the episode description. Words are hard today, it seems. How does this work? That looks good. Let's first look at an object-oriented example of dependency injection, the way you would probably do it if you were new to JavaScript and you're jumping into this and you're coming from a C# background. Let's imagine that we are coding a user manager. It's a thing that for now is responsible for adding users to the database. I'm now going to code this using my hands. Yay, I did it! Alright, let me walk you through this. I just have to start mouse pose. Come on, there. Cool. So, first line here, this is just a fictitious database, the Unicore database that I made up on the spot, just like that. App is, this is just our main application. We are not going to go through that because it doesn't exist. I made that up as well. And we have this user manager. We are going to be coding this. It doesn't exist at this spot quite yet, but I want to show you first how we use it. We begin here by instantiating a new database connection here. We pass it a host and a port, it's some basic configuration options, and we get a connection object back from instantiating this class. And this is some API that we are getting from the database vendor. We have no control over this or anything. We wouldn't even have that if it was real. Down here on line 10, we are instantiating our user manager, and we are passing it the connection object. You see here, this thing, we're passing it in here. And we get, of course, a user manager object, our user manager instance of the user manager class here. Finally, here on line 12, we are passing in the user manager that we created here, and we're passing it into the constructor of the app, our main piece of code that is dependent on the user manager. It needs it to do stuff, and then it goes away and starts it or something. This is not terribly important, it's just to give you some context. What is important is what user manager does. So let's proceed to write user manager. Boom. Let's create that file. Save. And I'm gonna call that user manager.js. That's implemented. Some code. Let's walk through it. It's a user manager class. We need to export it as well. Export default user manager. Otherwise, code can't get to it from the outside, and then the file doesn't serve much purpose in the world. Anyway, it has a constructor that takes a database connection. Remember from the last code, let me show it to you. Here, the user manager accepts a connection object. Let's go back. That is what it gets here, and it will assign it to a private variable, private property that we call _connection, and we use it down here, but haven't typed it correctly. Create user here accepts a name, and it will then call table on users, and it's supposed to get some kind of object, command object of some sort back from that, which we call insert on with some options. I made all of this up. It needs is new here for some ungodly reason, and then we pass the name property as to the full name property to the insert argument, and it seems to return a promise here. And when that promise resolves, we get a user, and we extract user ID from that. So what create user will do is it will create a user with the name that we pass it, and then it will return a promise that eventually resolves to the ID of that user. That is what this fictitious little application does. Now, let's rewrite this in a functional way. I'm going to switch back to the main, starting the application, the init main thing first. And what I'm going to do here is that instead of calling this user manager, I'm going to call it user utils. And we're going to call it from user utils, because it's not really a manager object. It's going to be a set of functions, and this is no longer going to be instantiated like this. It's going to be you know what, we are not even going to have a containing object. We are just going to have a create user function, and it is going to be make create user, and that is going to take the connection object like that, and make create user is going to be something that we export from the user utils. Whoops, sorry about that. Pasty paste, make create user. And then create user is going to be something that we pass into the app, because the app is dependent on create user. All right, so we are going to code this thing, the user utils, next. But before I do, I would like to spend a little bit of time showing some love for you, the patrons. The astute of you might have noticed that there were no ads running before this video, and that is because your patronage, your financial support, has allowed me to turn those off. No more annoying pre-rolls, they are gone. Now I no longer need to care about making advertisers happy or keeping the view counts up. I only need to care about what you, the patrons, think. As of recording this, there are 1,465 of you, but there are 13 of you that have been very generous and selected either the incredibly stupid paper waste celebration tier or a higher one, and I would like to celebrate you now. Steven Friesen maybe, I don't know. Tom Lingham, Tom, Joel Thoms, Jonathan Church, Max Sartorius, Baron Mungetti, Manny Hagman, Manny, I love you. Bill Scanlon, this is an amazing guy. Anthony Zui, thank you Anthony. John Michelin, I love you. Nick Cherry, that's a lovely name, thank you so much. And last but not least, Joey Berzinski, thank you so much. All patrons, thank you so much for your support. You really didn't have to do that, but you did, and that makes you amazing. Your support allows everyone to enjoy Fun Function for free without ads, and it also allows me to pour more money and more time into Fun Function and take it to the next level. Thank you so much for being a patron. Alright, back to the code. Where were we? Okay, we were creating this user utils. Let's do that. You know what? I'm going to grab the user manager, copy paste that and keep it here, but comment it out so that you can get a reference and compare it. All right, coding. Bam! Okay, so let's have a look at what this does. Because this is, for some of you, this is going to be absolutely nothing strange, and for some of you that are probably new to JavaScript, this is going to be super weird. What is happening here? So what make create user does is that it creates the create user function for us. It's a little factory that creates the create user function. That's a bit of meta, but let's jump back to the example and have a look at what it does. So here we call the make create user and we pass in connection, and that will give us create user. So when this create user, when app actually does use it inside of itself, it will just call create user dot name, like Mark Smith. That's the way it's going to be used. So make create user is a thing that creates create user functions. Oh, it's not even a thing. Why am I saying a thing? It's a function that creates other functions. That is called a higher order function. And you can call, like, I have an episode on that and a long functional programming series that is following it, and you can check that out by clicking there. You can also find it in the episode description. Higher order functions, they are fantastic. Either way, let's jump back into user utils and see what we have there. So again, make create user, it takes a connection and then it returns this function. It creates this function. And this function, it takes a name, that's its only variable, only argument, and then it uses that inside of itself. And you know what? I did a copy paste here. This is stupid. In the earlier code, it would refer to the private property connection on the class, but we don't have any class here. We have a connection here as an argument, and we have access to that. So connection there, and then it does exactly the same thing as before. And because this is an arrow function and we don't use curly brackets here, we can do that when it's only one, when an arrow function has only one line. Then the return statement, we don't need that because that is implied when we leave out the curly brackets. So we could also do it like this, turn, but we don't do that in here because we can save that. It's nice and sleek. And what you're observing here with where we access connection, this is the power of closures in JavaScript. If you're new to closures, I have a video on that here, and you should watch that. But a quick primer they are so nice. I'm gonna make a bit of indentation here to make it perhaps a little bit more obvious. So this first function here, the outer factory function, or whatever you would like to call it, it will create a new closure. So code inside here, if we had used curly brackets here and there was space for more functions, or more code, I mean, anything here would have access to the connection parameter, of course. That because it's a function, and of course the function has access to its own arguments. But the fantastic thing about closures is that when we declare another function inside of a function, like connection here, we have access to that whatever this function has access to here, this code here also have access to the very same variables and arguments, such as the argument from the outer function. So this is what allows us to pull things like this off. Closures are really powerful. Let me go back to the previous indentation level. And this technique that we're using here, where we are creating a function that is kind of pre-filled with the connection, because, you know, we could have just done this, but then it would have been cumbersome to pass around, because then we would have to pass around both the make create user and have a reference to the connection somewhere. Like this allows us to pre-fill the create user with the connection. Let me go back to the main code. So what we do here is that we're creating a function that has we have kind of pre-filled it, or like loaded it with the connection. So it's a create user that is tied forever to this connection here, and that means that app, when it gets a create user, it can just call create user. It doesn't need to know anything about how the database is being accessed, because that is abstracted away inside of create user. It's a great example of dependency inversion. I have a video on that as well, but I actually in that video I call it inversion of control, which is not quite the same thing. I misunderstood the subtleties, but what I described there is dependency inversion, and the concept is the same. I just get the labels wrong. But either way, I digress. Let's look back to this thing here. This technique here, the pre-filling of the connection and the name, there's a name for this, and it's called currying. I do have an episode on that as well up there, or in the episode description. Back when I made that episode, I didn't really fully understand the need for currying as much as I do now, and I think that this actually illustrates the case a lot better than that episode did. But why would you do this? Why use currying instead of classes in order to do dependency injection? Why would anybody prefer this over classes? There are several reasons, but in this case, I think the strongest argument is just the minimalism. Functions is something that we already use in the language. Closures is something that we already use in the language all the time. And in this case, we can just get away with not using classes. We can just not add that to the toolbox that is our application. It's one less thing. Also, I would argue that the currying solution is simpler. It's just simply a lot less code. It's a lot more elegant. The class is just a bigger construct. Even if like, I know that classes are going to get arrow functions, so we could do something like this. Ow, ow, ow. And that makes the comparison a bit more fair. But as you see, there's still quite a bit of extra syntax in this case. And classes also has the extra complexity that involves this. This is arrow functions makes it a little bit nicer, but there's still a bit of confusion around what the hell this refers to in JavaScript. It's not rocket surgery, but it's an added complication when you compare it to this case, where it's just incredibly obvious what connection refers to and what it will refer to in all situations. There's no way of changing this, while in this case, if this wasn't an arrow function, this could be like changed depending on what context it was called. Classes do, in some cases, have performance benefits, but those are so minuscule that they are only in play if you are creating hundreds of thousands of objects per second. In this case, we are realistically only having a few user managers at best, so it's going to make absolutely zero impact on our application. And also, it's just beautiful! Look at how good it looks! But you might wonder what happens once we start adding more methods to the class. What would be the equivalent there? Like, let's say that we had a delete user or something like that. What would happen then? I will be talking about that in the next episode. Cliffhanger! You have just watched an episode of Fun Function. I release new episodes every Monday morning 0800 GMT. If you are watching from the future, you can check out next week's video here. Otherwise, you have to wait till Monday. And in the meantime, you might want to check out my Patreon video, which talks about why you might want to become a patron. I am MPJ. Until next Monday morning, stay curious.